So, Shweta, um, how did you and Priyanka meet? How did you happen to have that connection? What brought you together?
I think we know each other as sort of a senior junior from our master's course, which we did in Mumbai in the School of Media and Cultural Studies. And I think in that sense she was what's called a super junior. So she actually came into the course after I had graduated. But we got in touch when Priyanka actually emailed me about her thesis.
Mhm.
And she that time she was doing initially she was doing her thesis on food, and I was one of the few people who had done that's my other sort of research and film interest, which is food. So she'd written to me about that, and I remember having a chat with her, and I'd sent her my thesis. And then eventually it turned into a thesis on accessibility, wasn't it, Priyanka? So yeah, that's how we got in touch, but we knew of each other's presence, I think, in some way.
Yeah. So even for me, like my thesis, actually, I was working on understanding the perception audience have with the films which are being made in India, which kind of displays how disability is also perceived among the audiences, and that's why what I wanted to study and I wanted to write my thesis on. So yeah, that's how we got connected to each other.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot in common and a lot of interests in common.
Yes, yes.
We do. One of the most common thing is a love for food. We do that.
Yeah, we could go on about how much like between, so the triumvirate of we make film is Priyanka, me, and this filmmaker called Sumit Singh, who's not here today. But yeah, the three of us love food, and I think the filmmaking process was as much about conversations about disability and access as it was about what are we going to eat for breakfast or lunch or dinner. So yeah, that's also been a big connecting point.
It's important to keep fueled, isn't it? You have to stoke those boilers, keep yourself from getting weak from hunger. That's not good. Priyanka, what did you find in your work about Indian film? Did you contrast it with film outside of India as well?
Yeah, in a lot of sense. Like for example, India in a way is not very accessible as a country, and even the public transport is not accessible. So many of the films which kind of depicts a person with disability, they have a very side role. Like they are not the major protagonist. Most of the films, and if you look at the films where the protagonist is a person with disability, it's very much towards the lens from the outside world. Like they're not understanding the story, or not, like there is no connection between the person having the disability and putting on a show about what their understanding of society is. So that is one thing which I really really like came out starkly during my thesis work.
I think that's actually. I thought the film that you used to illustrate that with the amputations was very, very good as well. And the film itself, I think it was pretty stark. I mean, it's quite a shocking scene, isn't it? When that, ooh,
It's
that's quite.
it's one of the most famous scenes and one of the most famous movies of all time in Bollywood. So it's shocking that it kind of um, and I've spoken about the impact of that scene in on my father's life when he was just 15, um, and I think it is shocking to someone who hasn't grown up with that film, I think, but also it's something that you literally grow up with that in other forms of popular culture, in advertisements, in some VJ on some music channel will reference it, and they'll say the same dialogue. So it's a very strange way in which it's kind of seeped into that film and that scene, and all of that has just seeped into India in so many ways.
So it's part of the culture now and the perception of disabled people. Would
Yes.
you like to explain the scene that we're talking about, just for the viewers?
Yeah. Priyanka, do you want to, or I'm happy to?
I think you have to do a better job on that.
Well, yeah, I might make it a bit theatrical. I think it's basically this is a scene where there are two main characters. So there is the villain called Gabbar, and then there is the main protagonist is Thakur. So Thakur is used to be a he is a policeman, and Gabbar is sort of creating a lot of trouble in the village that this policeman lives in, and he sort of goes in every time, he loots the villagers, takes whatever he wants and leaves. So this policeman is trying to, fight crime, and at some point within the process, the sort of rivalry reaches a point where Gabbar kills all of Thakur's family. So Thakur goes to sort of seek revenge, and that's when he gets caught. And this is a scene where he's sort of tied up to well, what's it called? Poles, cement,
Yeah.
stands. I don't know. And Gabbar basically keeps. So there was this one scuffle earlier in the film where Thakur holds Gabbar by his neck, and he says that this ye haath kya hai? I mean, I'll translate it, but in Hindi there's a dialogue which is like, this hand is going to strangle you, and it's a very heavy
Very
hand,
strong hand. The
strong
hand.
hand. Yeah. And so when Gabbar wants to see, kind of punish Thakur, he basically puts his hands up, ties it up, and then amputates his hands. And it's one of the most sort of traumatic as well as most iconic scenes of that film, because that is what drives Gabbar to, the fact that he is an amputee is played throughout the film in various ways. Even at the end, the punishment that Gabbar gets is not death, it is disability. So it's and there are many people who've analyzed the scene and spoken about it from a disability studies lens. But it is true that disability being a punishment worse than death is definitely a theme that runs in that particular, through that scene, basically.
I think as well, it sounds as if it's not just about disability being a punishment, but it's also about being a punishment for being an evil person. Being a criminal, being a thief, being somebody who does bad things. I mean, would you agree with that? What would your take on that be?
Like for example, even I think all across the films, if you look at, there are like pirates are always shown with an eye patch. It's a kind of a sign which says that this person's character is a pirate. So yeah, the connection between showing a villain and having certain kind of disability is very much correlated in the films most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also something that, I mean, continues to be in, monstrosity as it's constructed, or the way one directly links disfigurement with horror, or disfigurement with any form of, or disabilities with any form of evil, is an understood cultural cue, which is so problematic, I think. Yeah.
I can identify with that, because I think there's a link with Western portrayal in film of disabled people as well. It used to be the case when you knew that something bad was happening, it was the disabled person who was causing it. So I think that does seem to be a crossover as well.
Yeah.
So your film is challenging that, isn't it?
Yes, most definitely. And I mean, I think in many ways, because the film was born out of a period of research, there were a couple of elements there. One was the representational element. So there was research that I read up on. There's lots of people who've spoken about this. And for whatever reason, at this very moment, I'm getting confused between Mike Oliver and the other person who has spoken about this. But there were these sort of tropes, representational tropes that exist of disability representation. That was one of the things that I definitely was looking at when we were, writing up what needs to be in the film. I think that is a very active choice to sort of talk about how disability is represented on screen, and how the participation of disabled people is obviously important in the writing stage and the overall filmmaking stage. Like, I wonder what would have happened, as I ask in the film, I wonder what would have happened had my dad written that film. Because the film has been written by an iconic script writing duo. Salim Javed are the two sort of writers, and they've written some of the best known films and really entertaining films. But clearly there was no disability representation there because of the way it has been talked about and the way it has been spoken about. So yeah, that was definitely a very active choice.
So it sounds as if it had become a cultural norm almost for the script writers to see disabled people as other, different, not the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And that continues, I think, even, I mean, there are very, very famous filmmakers like Sanjay Leela Bhansali interestingly, who work with disabled crew members. But the representation of disability, if you were to look at it, analyze and do some close analysis, it would really not necessarily measure up to how we need it to be. So it's very interesting how that works. I don't know if Priyanka also wants to add to that.
Like for me, my understanding is like especially in India, we have like there is a lot of cultural aspect to it as well. Like most of the characters in the mythological stories are like the villain characters or the characters who are causing trouble in the family or in the society are the people with having a disability, and even people who are powerless, they are having a disability. So in a way, it's kind of showing the perfect image can be a perfect person to lead the society, and that's the message which keeps on coming again and again if you look at the cultural context. And when it comes to films, I guess one of the major thing I noticed is uh, majorly whenever the characters are portrayed by a non-disabled person, or even a story which is written by a non-disabled person, automatically that other factor will come in, because my experience is, even though if I share it to thousands of people every day, still it won't be able to, the person might not be able to do justice to it. And it happens to me also, like me having a locomotor disability. If another person who is on the wheelchair, and if that person is coming and telling me his story, I might empathize, I might try to understand the situation, but not necessarily I'll be able to justify his actions or her actions in that case, or able to understand what are the contexts in which the conversation is going and why he's saying or she's saying the certain things which they are doing anyway. So that's the major thing which I feel is needed right now, to have crew members who are person with disability. It not only makes the whole filmmaking process inclusive, but it also gives justice to the story and to the creative space.
I think that sounds extremely logical. I mean, in terms of the cultural shift, Priyanka, what do you think is necessary with regards to filmmaking and the portrayal of disabled people?
I think one of the major thing I feel right now is the awareness. There are like people, they are really not aware of disabilities. Like for example, if we say intellectual disability, they automatically are considered as someone who are not intelligent at all. They're not understanding the aspect of different parameters which exist. And even with the person, like for me, I have a locomotor disability. I use crutches to work. So for many places, even in India, which are not accessible, I still try to come up with solutions, and I do manage it somehow. I don't know how, but I do. But not necessarily every person who's using the crutches will be able to. So to understand that aspect and having that understanding and awareness to that particular level is very much needed, to understand that okay, the film with the character having a certain disability is the story of that particular character. It's not necessarily a story of all the person having that particular disability. And because of this, I feel there is a lot of perceptions and stereotypes which keeps on going and pushing more, like the gap is getting more wider and wider because of that. So maybe having a lot of awareness or having a lot of interactions with person with disabilities, because the places are not accessible in India. A lot of people are not on the like they're not going to any social event, they're not participating in the social event, and automatically the gap again widens up a lot. So yeah, that's one of my understanding of how the whole thing is kind of making things more and more inaccessible.
That I think that again that makes a lot of sense. With regards to technology, in the film, you both focus on the use of technology and using technology positively for to be adaptable, to be able to be useful in terms
Don't
of a
hear me.
tool for
Um,
disabled.
You got freeze for some time, but now you're
oh,
back.
okay. Yeah, my internet can be a bit dodgy at times. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
I'm back.
sorry.
I have been
Did you want me to repeat that?
Yes, please, because I missed that completely and I was just completely frozen.
Okie doke. What I was saying was, you do mention technology a lot. You mention and you look at ways of using technology and ways of understanding um, the techniques of using technology in the film. What impact do you think that's going to have as technology becomes more widely available to people in terms of their understanding of disability and disabled filmmakers?
Well, I think I have two sort of points in that, in response to that. One is that with the rise of digital technology, filmmaking has become so much more affordable, so much more accessible. Now, I'm not using it necessarily in the way of disability and accessibility, but more widely available. Because we don't have to buy tapes and film and whatnot. So it is most definitely making it much easier to work with the video format. Let's say that by default is more easily accessible than across various communities, various diverse communities, which helps. Um, which helps a lot. But that's a starting point. I think there are things we found during the research, which say when we were working with Anuja, who's one of the protagonists, and I asked her about what would you need to be able to take photographs better or take videos better, and we discussed whether braille stickers on or braille sort of on a device would help, and then there was that the acknowledgement that yes, that works. And we looked at the work of this blind filmmaker called James Rath, who is based in the US, but works with Apple. And that, there's a very specific access that Apple brings to you, but it's not affordable in the Indian context, for the most part. So there is a need overall to, kind of work with formats which are open source to make these things accessible more widely. Because if it's an app that like a screen reader but for video, very specifically describing what's going on screen, that's something that Anuja expressed a preference for. Having said that, I think there's only a limit up to which technology can help. And when we talk about, one of the things I do talk about in my research overall in my thesis is that it's beyond a point. We're not just looking at independence, which is extremely important, but we're looking at interdependence, right? And that's not my idea. That's Mia Mingus, and there's lots of people who've spoken about it. But interdependence within filmmaking is a very standard way in which we function. Nobody makes the film on their own. Nobody actually, you could be a self-shooting filmmaker and do things, but that's not how it usually functions. So there is the element of interdependence very inherent in the act of filmmaking. So why do we want to reach a point where I can do everything all by myself? But why aren't we working together? Why aren't we collaborating? So that's actually where I want the conversation to also move, that while technology has its potential and we definitely need to develop apps and gadgets that support the process, it's also important for us to work with each other and understand how we collaborate, because that's what can actually help the process rather than just but yes, Priyanka, I know, did lots of little innovations during the during the shoot, which had technology been better, we would have it would have been more accessible for her.
Priyanka, what are your thoughts about what are your thoughts about what we've been talking about, the use of technology as an assistant and an aid?
Yeah. So I somehow I really feel like what Shweta is saying is exactly my thoughts on it. Like having a technology which makes it accessible is one thing, but also having the space to be open to making suggestions or adding on creative ideas is also as important. Like for me, for my in my experience, when I joined the media and cultural school while I was studying, I ended up having a conversation with my professor where I had certain doubts in my head, thinking like, okay, the technical aspect when it comes to carrying a camera around or carrying, tripods and all those things, like it will be really difficult. And plus, in case I fell down with it, then it will be
Yeah.
more difficult financially for me. So all those things and all those thoughts kind of kept coming back to me, and I got really a little bit, I had little insecurities about it. So I had a conversation, and during the conversation itself, like our professors made me feel very secure about it and made me understand the process of filmmaking. It's not just about handling digital aspect or handling the cameras or the equipment. It's more to that. Even your thoughts, your creative ideas add on to it. And I think during the course somehow, maybe I don't know how, but somehow I got like a lot of strength in creating things through an app. So my technical aspect when it comes to editing films or creating illustration or even designing a booklet and all is something which I got pretty well. I think I do. But yeah, that's one of the thing I feel I got that opportunity, to explore my options, and that is the most needed thing right now.
So it sounds as if experience is really important
Yeah.
and opportunity. So, what I take from what you're both saying is that it's all very well having these things if you work for Apple, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's accessible to your neighbor up the road. And for you, Priyanka, I mean, it's sort of like it's being able, excuse me, to explore where your difficulties lie and to be able to find solutions. I think the finding solutions is critical, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's also in a very fun way to go about it. Like there are few solutions which doesn't work at all, and I figured out after a lot of errors and trials. But there are some things which really worked, and I know my friends who are using those solutions as well. So it's kind of you trying to understand what are your strengths and playing according to that. And that goes with every person, in fact, not just person with disabilities. I think it will go beyond that. So,
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that came over for me during the film was the level of respect that everybody had for each other and the respect for difference. So, for example, the opportunities for a blind filmmaker or photographer won't necessarily work for a deaf filmmaker or photographer, but that's okay. Nobody's trying to make one fit into the other. It's about saying, well, okay, this is what you need, this is what you need, this is where we meet in the middle. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, definitely. I think one of the things that was, ran through as an ethos, during the entire shoot and beyond that as well, is that respect for each other and understanding what we all need was something that we really made central to how we work. This included disagreements. This included, everything. And it's like working across any crew or any research project or any shoot where there are different people that come together. There are people who you acknowledge, obviously, what the questions of privilege and power are with respect to disability, with respect to gender. With there are loads of ways in which these elements of identity will interact. But one of the key things that we did was that we always made sure we spoke about it. I think as a crew, I think we've had some fantastic sessions, and I still regret not filming it. Although I don't know if we would have spoken in the same way had we filmed it. Was our evening wind down conversation. So we would have a bit of a debrief after each day because each workshop went on for 5 days with individual filmmakers, and we'd come back, we'd talk about it, and we would sort of not always agree on what went on or how we wanted to approach it the next day, especially because we came from different engagements or levels of engagement with disability. So my father's a disabled person, so there's a level of association, so I have knowledge and obviously doing my research on it, so there is an understanding of it, but there's no lived experience. Priyanka had lived experience and has worked with, say, the deaf community within India certain pockets at least, and had knowledge of that, but again is still outside that community in many ways. And Sumit had no previous understanding of disability per se, but was very interested to learn about it. So there weren't always these agreements about how we should approach things, or the same level of this is what it is like. So then there would be educational conversations across the board, including with our participants. Like, for example, one of our participants was initially quite patronizing towards Priyanka, and then Priyanka had a conversation with him and said that, listen, I don't think, if you'd like to talk about it, you can, but there was always room for these sort of for communication, basically.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Priyanka?
Yeah, like for me, like even when like Shweta just said when it comes to having conversation, I think one of the major thing was the film also made a lot of engagement with the audience is also maybe because we are coming from a different background of understanding disability. So and it helped in making the film also because when in a way when I was more like when I end up talking about disability, I end up talking more about accessibility aspect, the psychology aspect of it. And then Sumit would be there and he'll be like, okay, now that thing I understood, now what is the technical thing, what we can do to make it inclusive in the technical aspect. And then we will brainstorm together and we will talk about it. And the conversation, it went really really far, and it was like long conversations. But some like we just said before, like we had disagreements, but we also had that space to have that disagreements and understanding each other's perspective about it.
I think that's really important, and it sounds as if excuse me, it sounds as if you gave it the value that it needed. Excuse me a second. One of the things that struck me watching the film was that in the unpicking of what's needed for individual filmmakers to take part and to be able to learn and create within their craft, there's a tremendous overlap. There's something that's actually quite interesting to me as a British person in looking at the access needs and the requirements of people in a different continent. I've never been to India, unfortunately, but sort of like there's obviously there's a vast cultural divide. You've got a vast difference in terms of cultural history, etc., etc. But there's a universality in the things that you were picking up within your film about inclusion and about disabled people being included into something that's actually quite mainstream. I think an example of that for me was when you were talking about deaf filmmakers, and the deaf filmmakers were saying, well, we actually don't have words for this. Within Indian Sign Language, there's no word for this. And, you were saying, oh, that must be difficult, or the equivalent. Forgive me, I'm paraphrasing. But the deaf person came back and said, no, it's not a problem. We create these things. We know what we're talking about. So we're creating a language. And I've heard something very similar in the UK. And I think that universality is really interesting. And it's something, strangely enough, that I had never really thought about before in this sort of framework. Excuse me. Do you want to pick that up in some way, either of you or both of you?
I am aware that Priyanka's worked with the deaf community more, and in fact, she was a bit of a sort of liaison point for whichever deaf filmmakers we worked with. So I wonder if Priyanka wants to add anything, and I'm happy to sort of add on to that.
Yeah, you're right about the aspect of having the signs, which I think it was during the workshop when all the filmmakers were like the deaf filmmakers, they ended up saying they are creating the signs. And one of the reason I understand is that in Indian space there is no dictionary for ISL right now, which is universal. So like certain parts of our country are having their own version of sign language, and I think that goes with any language as per se. Like it changes from area to area, from district to district, and it has little bit of different dialogues or a dialect to be very specific, and that goes with the sign language as well. So I remember when we were shooting with Mijo and we had this conversation, and we had our certified sign language with a certified sign language uh, interpreter with us. His name was Leon, and he was there, and I was very much confident that that, like, nothing can go wrong because I have worked with him before, so I knew what's going on. But when we ended up going to Mije's house, we understood, okay, his signs were very much specific to the area he belonged to, and many of the signs he had created to communicate with his family or with his wife. And somehow we did struggle a little bit, but yeah, that's what we started asking and confirming him, like, is this what you mean to say, is this what we are trying to this is what we are understanding, is it this right thing to do? And yeah, that's how I see it when it comes to having this languages and having this different understanding of different languages.
I think that's a really important point, because it's about listening carefully and exploring and trying to understand if there's differences, what people mean. It's not always immediately obvious, is it? I think even for someone who's hearing, if we're talking to other hearing people, we might be saying things that make a lot of sense to us, but don't necessarily make a lot of sense to anybody else. But it is that respect again, which I'm picking up, Priyanka, which I think is important.
Yeah, even like when we were doing the workshop with Mijo and even in during the workshop, all the filmmakers, they had their own sign of showing that they are ready to shoot. So they had that 1 2 3, and there's the sound, like a sign for a sound, there's a sign for a light, like, which is like this. So all these different signs we also learned in the process, and we were like, okay, yeah, that's an interesting thing to do. Maybe we can try it during our shoot, maybe next time.
Yeah. If I can add also that I think this helped us understand how we can work in, across disabilities in film crews, because as Sumit picked up very well, on a TV floor, you usually, there'll be silence, and then you still need to communicate with each other. And this is an example of deaf gain in many ways, that, you would just ask a deaf person what they use, and kind of ask them to educate the rest of the crew on how they can use that, because that is so straightforward. And why not, basically, was our question. So I think the other thing here is also that there are disadvantages also of not having one sign or one, or having the vocabulary related to filmmaking in Indian Sign Language at this stage. Uh, there can most definitely be, English or Hindi education side by side, should we want it as deaf people, but not, no, I'm not prioritizing speaking over, signing at all. I definitely support signing, but there are there's access to language matters in so many ways, that if I am from a film studies perspective saying that there's something called mise en scène, and that's how you set up the frame, and there are elements of the frame that you, now if there is no word that exists in Indian Sign Language at the moment that mirrors that concept, then the way you communicate about something within a crew or within production process changes. um, and that's not to say that the person who's collaborating with you doesn't know. It's just that there is no vocabulary to communicate that quickly. So those are things that need time, that need listening, that need communication. And that's what, again, I think, yeah, it is the same strand that we keep picking up on, but it is true that at this stage we really, really need that, while all of these things are in process of standardization of Indian Sign Language and such.
I think as well you did something additional to demonstrate how to explore the technical aspects of photography with your blind participant. Forgive me, I've forgotten her name.
Anuja, yes.
Right, Nuja, what was that you explained to her how framing worked, and also panning and tilting.
Yes.
Now, I thought that was a really nice explanation. Forgive me, nice isn't a very sensible word, but it was a useful explanation. When I first started working with the filmmakers and photographers group, we initially worked with about 20 to 30 people all of whom had learning difficulties. So we were bringing things right down to the basics. And I think that the way that you were explaining the function of the technical aspects of things would work for anybody, actually. I thought that was really useful. Clearly, when you're a filmmaker and you're a professional and you've got a tight budget and not much time and you have to film to schedule, then you do need to create a shortcut. But I think, in a way, you showed how the preparation can really facilitate the smooth production of a film. Have you got any thoughts of that you'd like to give me?
Actually, that is something which, I have, after that workshop, I've actually incorporated that in my first year of film teaching. So it definitely does have, applicability across any context. Because it is true that even though film is audio and visual in its sort of most basic sense, the way we need to teach it doesn't have to be only audio and visual. It can be across all of the senses that exist, and that would automatically make it a lot more accessible. And this is something Debopriya also picks up on in terms of how education can be more inclusive. You talk about other senses, you talk about whatever ways you make it more well-rounded, and then people pick up that concept via whatever ways that are accessible to them, right? And that is something which, again, it just came as part of one of the discussions, right? That we realized that obviously working with a blind person, you would use some level of tactile, interaction with Anuja, because she was willing to explore and try it out with us. And I think we developed a very solid friendship as well. I mean, we're still very much in touch about her kids and whatnot. And between Anuja and me, we were also able to, kind of talk to each other about, okay, I'm going to hold your hand now, and then, we'll see how you understand this concept. So some of those aspects really worked just seamlessly, actually. And then Priyanka has an addition in the film that she does as well, which is about how do we explain where the camera is. So do you assume you are the camera, or do you kind of imagine the camera to be somewhere else, and what is easier to understand? So, yeah.
Priyanka, how would you explain the need for more than one camera? Because at one point you were using 3 cameras, weren't you, I think? So how could you share the need for that?
Basically, it was only during a few of our shoots where me and Shweta were the only crew people, and most of the time Sumit would be around and he would be there to handle the cameras. What I did is basically I tried to shoot the aspect which focused more on the accessibility aspect. Like many a times when we were shooting, I used to shoot a lot of footage of our interpreter, who's the sign language interpreter, who was interpreting different signs. And I wanted to do that because I didn't wanted to leave any aspect of conversation in case we have left, during the conversation. If we do end up overlooking an aspect, we can go back and look at it. So that's how that's what my intention was with the camera and with the film. And most of the time I was a part of a sound aspect, and it was really an amazing experience because there are times when I could set up everything on my own, but there were times when I needed assistance, and I would when we were shooting in Kochi with Mijo. I remember we were shooting in an outdoor space, and the space was not very, I can't sit on the floor or something of that sort. It was very inaccessible in that way. And when I communicated with Sumita and Shweta, they ended up, making sure that there's a table, there's a chair, and they've set up the whole thing together. And then that's how I think most of the things we worked on together.
So that emphasizes the need for collaboration, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yes, always. I think that's something that we. There were times when we just asked Priyanka, okay, like what do you need us to do? We will settle. We will set it up, and then she was like, okay, I need to be placed here, and this is how I'm going to be. And we knew what the frame was. So obviously, you place yourself accordingly as a sound person. Sorry for that. There's an ambulance going by. But yeah, that is something that we spoke about once we were on set, which did have its disadvantages at times, just in terms of the patience that our participants had to have with us in terms of how long we took to set up at times. But it was a part of the process, and we prioritized that.
Do you think they learned from watching you set up?
Yes.
Yeah,
I think so. I think there was we had particular. I'd say there was one workshop with Mijo in general, which had its sort of moments of what's going on and why is this happening? But because by the end of it, and that's why even Mijo in his that crew debrief kind of thing that we have in the film as well. He says that earlier I thought it would be very easy, but as it went by, I realized what we were really doing. And that is actually a summary of how that workshop went over the 5 days, because there were lots of moments in that workshop which were educational for both sides, I'd say, where we had to suspend what we were planning, and Mijo had to suspend what he had preconceived notions of. So there were lots of ways in which we constantly learned from each other. Yeah.
And also with I think with every participant with whom we worked, ended up having providing me a space to make sure that I was being included. Even that happened with Debupriya. Debupriya one day she didn't ask me specifically, but she was looking around, thinking, okay, is this what you need, and and even with Anuja, even when she would ask Shweta a lot of questions many a times. And I think the one time Shweta just said that, as she's right here, Priyanka is right here, why don't we just ask her? And from that day, she actually started asking me, are you comfortable there? Do you want me to give you an extra pillow or what? So I think with every participant that happened, and every participant ended up understanding the inclusion aspect, and also making sure that the space is there to me to work as a crew person and not be just a person with disability.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. You were valued as part of the team, and that's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because many of the projects which I was involved before, I think somehow because I was mostly in charge of making sure that the film or the product which we are making is accessible. I was the only voice which came out again and again saying that, okay, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to think of. But I think that's what I think. Even few days back, me and Shweta were just having this discussion, and we ended up I was just reflecting on how the whole process went while making the film, and it was so engaging for me because I found a space where I could share about accessibility, but also had the space where people were also understanding and giving me a feedback. Okay, this is what is possible and this is what is not. So maybe we can tweak it in certain way, and that really, really made the whole experience enjoyable and fun for me.
I think being fun is important, isn't it? Because otherwise it can get a bit grim, and
yes.
Yeah, you don't want tensions to rise.
No. Our footage, I mean, when I was editing the film, I have to say some of the footage is just unusable because we're laughing in the background or something. Some of it is just hilarious too, and it's all of those inside jokes which wouldn't have worked for the film anyway. But it's just lovely to go through all of those and to see how, I think, even though, and I know Priyanka said this to me earlier, where initially there was obviously it took a while. We did a crew orientation process actually, where we met and we spoke, and we just spent a couple of days together, well, just acquiring equipment and whatnot, running around Mumbai and figuring all of that out. But that really helped us build a relationship before starting off the workshop or the shoot, to get to understand each other's needs. Because even for me, I'm very used to the access needs of my father. He's a double arm amputee. He has no sort of he doesn't have an access need in relation to mobility, for example, when it comes to stairs. So there's this example which I keep referring back to, but I completely forgot that one of the places I chose for lunch in Kolkata during our shoot was inaccessible because I had gone there with my father. It becomes a reminder moment for you to kind of say that, okay, it was accessible for your dad, but it was not accessible for Priyanka. And Priyanka being the sort of, well, she has the strongest triceps and biceps I know. So I know it was very, very difficult, but I know that that was one of the, moments which were educational for me. But the fun, and that was again for food, but the fun elements have always been maintained and retained as much as possible.
When you look at the film, are there things that you would have liked to include that you didn't?
Lots of things.
Really?
Yes. Think the film was made, every film is made with a certain focus and structure that, is meant to serve what the purpose is. The footage was from participatory, semi-structured workshops, which gave us so much material, so much material. And I'm speaking of this also as research data because that was the process that I came from for my PhD. There had to be thematic ways in which I was able to arrange that in a film, which is watchable, which is, shareable. And there's a reason that the structure exists in, the way it does as 3 chapters, because I'm hoping that the thematic focus of each of these case studies is something that we can then, if we need to break it down for policy making discussions or showing, across the industry or engaging with various types of stakeholders for impact and change. That is something that I'm really, that's how the film has been structured. So much has not made it into the film, little nuances, but these are all things which I know I've written about, and there are things that we'll be talking about. Say, for example, Priyanka and I, we just confirmed yesterday that we'll be co-presenting a paper at, a conference, hopefully, if it gets selected. But we're going to continue those conversations that didn't make it into the film through these sort of presentations and papers and publications, hopefully.
That sounds really important. Priyanka, what would you see that you haven't included that you might want to include?
When it comes to my understanding of how disability aspect is perceived in India, there are many aspects which we kind of overlook. When it comes to different class, when it comes to different religion, the cultural aspect, the environment of where the person has been born and brought up, the family structure, all these things which uh, does play a part, because at the end of the day we are talking about filmmakers and their understanding of creation and creativity, and all these things they kind of build up, the ideas they do kind of build up, and if you get that nurturing environment, it the stories or the conversation takes a very different turn. When it comes to person who is not being in an inclusive environment, the perception of this society is very different, and all those things, it's a very nitty-gritty things, I would say, which plays a very important role when we are talking about disability community in India, basically, to understand how the engagement is even with different disabled person, like a person having a visual impairment, how they are engaging with a person who is deaf, how the engagement works and what are the understanding of it. So yeah, lot of things. Yeah, there are a lot of things we could have included in the film. Hopefully, we will someday in some other form.
Yes. These are conversations which I think need to keep happening. So there are various ways in which I'm really hoping that we can use the footage to, develop more things over a period of time. We'll see also what the response is to the film, to the project as it moves forward, and then, whatever content we need to pick up. There's so many conversations we had about, say, for example, signing deaf people vis-a-vis lip reading deaf people, parental sort of engagement with deafness, well, all kinds of things really. And like, I'm very aware of the fact that the film is very much from the interweaving of the the 3-4 stories happens via my lens. and that is important because what I'm presenting here is a learning roadmap for myself in many ways, which I hope speaks to other filmmakers who don't identify as disabled. Because there are moments where I question what I myself am doing, or where I'm making the mistakes. And my dad was obviously very straightforward in the way he says it in the film. But there are lots of elements which I know I've structured based on my lens of it and my interaction of it. So yeah, that's a conscious choice again.
Even to understand, like, yeah, we are talking about technology, we are talking about spaces where a person with disability, they can themselves create a film on their own. But having the technology is the only thing. Having the access of that technology is also an aspect, because not everyone can afford Apple phone. No, it's not possible. So I know there's a technology. I know that it is possible, but can a person really afford it and make the films and go with their passion? So yeah, there are a lot of things we need to include, I feel.
I take your point completely. Resourcing is really important, and digital exclusion is something that we're very mindful of in East London, because there's an awful lot of people locally who are just completely digitally excluded, and more this government in the UK is requiring digital applications, online applications for various benefits for this, that, and the other. So it is something that needs addressing, I think, globally, actually. But I think particularly when you have a, sort of like, perhaps you've got an emerging aspect of filmmaking, it sounds to me, in India. Perhaps I've got that wrong, but it sounds as if certainly for disabled filmmakers, you've got a mass of material that you've collected and a lot of learning. I'm very pleased to hear that you're looking to present this. I think it's important that people hear and see this. But if I was going to say, okay, I give you funding, you can do anything you want, what film would the two of you collaborate on if funding was no problem?
Ooh, the dream, Priyanka.
What all things we can do.
Yeah. I don't even know if would we make a film on, I mean, would there be a brief that it had to be about disability? Because I think between Priyanka and me, we have a lot to talk about. So we might make.
No, not necessarily. It could be anything you wanted, anything at all. It's worth thinking about, isn't it? Maybe something to aim for.
Yeah.
What do you think, Priyanka?
If like, I'm just speaking my mind here, maybe having a conversation about traveling and disability in India. That's one thing which is very much needed, because I struggle a lot when I have to travel to cities across. So I think having a place or a series or a movie about it will be really great.
People would learn a lot from it as well, to be honest. Yeah. And maybe that's one way to bring about change as well. When you think about it, I've always thought educating people isn't enough. They need to be able to learn it, not just sort of like in their minds, but in their hearts. And I think your film really does encapsulate that. I'm going to wind up in a minute because we've been talking for ages, which is lovely. But is there anything that you'd like to include and make sure that you've each included?
I mean, I'm going to take a second to think about that, because I think I'm trying to filter out what I want to include. It's just,
Sure.
Yeah.
Priyanka, what about yourself?
I'm still thinking.
Okay, well, look, I'll give you a bit of feedback about the film. My immediate thoughts were the production values were phenomenal. I thought it was extremely well produced and very, very well edited. I'm a documenter myself. I'm very passionate about documentation. And so often documentation is dry, it's boring. It's the sort of thing that you have to watch because you have to, be inclusive. But with your film, I thought it was just captivating. I got caught up in the stories. I got caught up in each of your stories, as well as the stories of the people that you were working with, because you became part of the process. You allowed yourself to be part of the process. And I thought that worked very well. There were little touches that really appealed to me. And they were the dots. I loved those little dots. I really got a kick out of those. I work a lot around inclusion, and it's a lovely way to demonstrate inclusion, and so simple. And it's not intellectual. It's straightforward. It's very honest. It's a very honest way to demonstrate inclusion. I thought the film itself. I very much enjoyed watching it. I very much enjoyed watching it more than once. So from that perspective, I'd really like to thank both of you for submitting it. It's been a joy for me. Is there anything else you'd like to add as we come to a close?
Thank you, first and foremost. I think it's just lovely to hear that, because I'm very aware that it's not necessarily working in most of those film festival circuits, which are very, very single protagonist, faces a problem, overcomes and finds the solution kind of narrative trajectories. So there are times when you feel a bit disheartened, but I'm so glad all of those little touches and all of those all of the effort that we put in is being recognized. That really, really means a lot. I think if I were to add just one thing, there's a long road ahead of us, and I know that this is not something that I'm doing as a part of, here's a PhD project, it's over, and that's it. I think this was the start of many things that I do want to do, and collaborate more properly with as many people within in India as possible, across identities, to make filmmaking a lot more inclusive and a lot more just and talk less and do more, basically. And I think that's something that if anybody is interested in working with us, or partnering with us, or helping out our impact project over the next, I think it's going to take about 3 years at least to bring all of that content and conversations to some sort of fruition. I think just get in touch with us. I think we'd love to hear from anyone who wants to work with us, fund us, because that's been the biggest barrier. And at the stage, the way both governments across the UK and India, their focus on how they work with about disability and what they fund and how the funding structures exist are just not helping out anybody who really needs the help. So that's something that I think there's lots of things we want to do, but we want to do it with the right people and with the right resources, because we want people to get paid for it. That's something that I will add as a bit of a plea almost, but a desperate one almost. Yeah.
And Priyanka, what about yourself?
Yeah, I would like to add about, like, if you look at the film, I know you also said right now just that how you felt, it's a fun film, it kind of gives that fun vibe out of it. And I think that is very important when it comes to any project when we are working, and having that space of inclusion, having that space of diversity, and then in fact enjoying the process is something which is very, very much important. And I would just like to add, like for me it was really an amazing experience to work on the film and to be part of this project.
Likewise.
Thank you. I mean, thank you both. And I think I'm really pleased that you put out your plea for funding. It isn't easy. It isn't easy at all. And you're quite right about the funders not necessarily meeting the people who needed funding properly. I think that's absolutely spot on. But it's been an absolute joy. I've really enjoyed meeting you both and listening to you and talking to you about your film and your filmmaking and about inclusion. So thank you so much for making the time.